From the campus of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, you're listening to 90.3 KRNU, Lincoln, Nebraska.
Up the floor to Trey McGowan. He'll lob it for his... Oh, my goodness! A one-hand hammer!
On 90.3 KRNU, it's Huskers Hoops Live.
You betcha! Jazz Shelley has a triple-double!
Now, here's your host, Jacob Schwantz.
Week 2 of Huskers Hoops Live. It is good to be back in the studio with you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this morning on KRNU and for the first time on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. If you go to the YouTube channel, we are live, so we'll be able to listen on the radio if you want to listen to the stream, or you can tune in on the YouTube channel and throw in a couple chats if you want to, ask some questions, whatever you want to do. So happy to be able to expand on the coverage this season. But this is Huskers Hoops Live, the show where you can expect to find the best coverage of both Nebraska and men's and women's basketball all season long. On today's edition, we'll go over the non-conference schedule for the Huskers women's basketball team. We'll talk about some of the exhibition games that we saw this past weekend with the men's and women's teams. I'll give some just kind of overall season expectations for the women's team. We did the men's team last weekend before the season started. Now we'll hit on the season expectations for the women's team. And on a Halloween day, October 31st, it's a big holiday, we give some spooky scenarios in the Big Ten, all on this edition of Huskers Hoops Live. So keep it here all the way 8 to 9 a.m. this morning, every Tuesday morning, all throughout the basketball season. But on Huskers Hoops Live, fans can expect some recaps and reactions, previews of the week's upcoming events. We can break down the men's and women's basketball team seasons, and we'll be reacting to any news or updates regarding Nebraska basketball. And in the news this weekend, not the best news. Keisei Tominaga with an ankle injury in the exhibition game against Doane. This really silenced any of the early energy to the season. There really was not as many people as I was expecting at the Doane exhibition. I thought that this team has a lot of promise, and I know it was announced beforehand of all the injuries, even day of. They announced that Matar Diop would not be in the starting lineup. It was expected that the freshman would get that opportunity because of all the injuries to the front court, and he would have been the tallest person available on the team, but I believe they said he had strep, so he was unavailable. And with all those injuries, I guess it's no surprise that the crowd didn't really show up to an exhibition, but whatever little energy there was in there, it was silenced even more. But luckily, Keisei was able to get up off the floor, hop himself back over to the bench. It appears that he's safe, at least for now, from any major injury to the ankle. I mean, when we saw him go down, I was really scared. I was expecting something similar to maybe Blaise Keita, who has struggled with ankle problems since around the middle of last season, I want to say, and he still wasn't available for the exhibition this past weekend. And with this team that's already battling so many injuries and so many guys who are unavailable, you really cannot afford to lose your best player for any significant amount of time. If it was ever going to happen, you would like the injury to happen in the beginning of the season like it did for Keisei here, as Nebraska's got about 4 or 5 games before Oregon State where you can maybe let Keisei rest up. And so hopefully he is doing much better in the coming days. But let's actually get into the men's exhibition game from this weekend. Nebraska wins 84-53. It was a lot closer than that in the first half, as Nebraska was dealing, obviously, again, with some adversity with the injuries before and during the game with Keisei Tominaga. But the leading scorer, ladies and gentlemen, Eli Rice, the freshman, 18 points. And you look at the rest of the box score in that game for Nebraska. C.J. Wilcher, Sam Hoiberg, Bryce Williams, Jamarcus Lawrence, and Keisei Tominaga were the starting lineup, the starting five in this exhibition. And if you look at that box score, you see 5 Gs at the position for all 5 starters. That is not what Nebraska is looking for. You need to get some front court presence. Hopefully these guys are back and better than ever. But Bryce Williams, I believe, was the tallest player on the court in the starting lineup for Nebraska. And he's not huge. He's, I believe, about 6'5", 6'6". So Nebraska was definitely small ball basketball this past Saturday or Sunday. And outside of that, Wilcher in the starting lineup, I thought looked pretty good. I thought C.J. Wilcher looked pretty good. 6 for 9 shooting. He had 15 points. He tied with Sam Hoiberg, who was 7 of 9 shooting for 15 points. So hopefully those two guys can start the season off strong. I'm not sure how much playing time Sam Hoiberg is going to get from the get-go, but I do know C.J. Wilcher, whether he's in the starting lineup or if he is in off the bench as maybe a 6th man or a shooter coming in off the bench, he is somebody that Nebraska is really going to need. And it was good to see him kind of start the season off, even though it was exhibition. It was good to see him kind of start the season off in a very effective way. You look at Bryce Williams, one of the newcomers. He had a lot of question marks coming in from Charlotte. How would he handle the transfer into a new system, a new team, and eventually, hopefully, he can transfer into the Big Ten successfully. Played just under 28 minutes, 5 of 9 shooting, 10 points, 2 assists, 3 turnovers. So that's a guy who can make a little bit of playmaking for your team, but he's definitely a main scoring option that Nebraska is going to want to go to. He's a double figure per night guy, in my opinion. And I feel like as long as there are other options that are bigger than him and he's not having to play the 5, and Nebraska doesn't necessarily play that traditional style post offense where a center or a 5-man is sitting on the block trying to post you up and go over his left shoulder or anything. I mean, even though Bryce Williams was the tallest guy playing at the 5, they were still moving the ball around the perimeter. So this game wasn't necessarily super far off from what the system is supposed to be. But I thought he did a good job. And I thought in his first game with this team, it was pretty impressive. Moving on, Jamarcus Lawrence, one of my favorite players to watch for this Nebraska team ever since he got a lot of minutes at the end of last year. Over 30 minutes played in the exhibition. Kind of struggled from the field. 2 for 7 from the field, 1 for 4 from 3. He did have 11 rebounds, though, which was very impressive. Only 5 points scored, but if Jamarcus Lawrence is going to rebound the basketball the way that he did, he had 10 defensive rebounds. If he can rebound that well as a guard at the 1 or the 2 and kind of go one-man fast break, pushing the tempo, that's what Coach Hoiberg wants him to do. And you know Jamarcus Lawrence is going to shoot better than 2 for 7 every single night. He is one of the better shooters on this Nebraska team. All you have to do is watch in warm-ups. I mean, when they're warming up before the game and they're doing their shooting workouts, he is lights out. He's maybe a step behind Keisei Tominaga, but pretty much everyone in college basketball is. So you can't put them on that standard. But Jamarcus Lawrence, very, very good player for this Nebraska team moving forward. Only 1 assist to 1 turnover. He did have 2 steals. I think kind of hard to gauge the assist numbers from this exhibition. You've got an offense that featured 5 guys in the starting lineup that we probably will never see all combined to make a starting 5 this entire season. I imagine by the time that regular season action is taking place, Nebraska will have at least a couple of those front court members back and ready for action. And yeah, it's just tough to gauge how well some of the facilitation and the playmaking works on a rotation that's just not something we're going to see a lot. But Keisei Tominaga, only 3 shot attempts on Sunday, 2 points. And again, he had the injury early in the first half, so kind of scary, but it seems like Keisei Tominaga will be fine given a couple of weeks of time off. Now, onto the bench, which may be even more interesting than some of the starting lineup. So, first we'll start with the Boogie Coleman. 22 minutes, 13 seconds played, 5 for 8 shooting. He had a banked-in 3 at the end of the first half to help Nebraska on the scoreboard, but he had 12 points, 3 assists, just 1 turnover, and overall a pretty solid day. And on a day where Nebraska was going to need some help offensively with all the missing bodies, I thought that Jerron Coleman did pretty good. He's got good strength for a guard. There was a couple times he would just drive to the rim on kind of just some broken possessions. He didn't always shoot it, but he would get his shoulder into guys. And while these were guards who played for Doane, I could see this tendency becoming something of a pattern for Jerron Coleman, which I think is going to be actually good for this Nebraska team. In a league like the Big Ten, I feel like you are going to need that physicality at all positions, not just the 5-man or some of your forwards. I think if you can bring in a couple guards who will not be afraid to get up into your space and kind of push you around a little bit, that's something that Jerron Coleman can bring, at least on the offensive side of the ball. Got to move down to the freshman Eli Rice. 23 minutes played, 7 of 14, and the three-point shooting was by far the best in this game. He goes 3 for 7, a couple in the corner as well, but 18 points for the freshman Eli Rice. He, I believe, led the team in scoring in the Spain trip this summer, and now he's leading the team in scoring with the injuries, mind you, but he's leading the team in scoring in the Huskers' first exhibition game. So it's getting close to being considered a pattern, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later on in the show, but keep an eye on Eli Rice moving forward this season. It's going to be a question mark how he can fit in with this rotation, how he can fit in with all these newcomers, but I almost feel like with the injuries, this almost provides Eli Rice an opportunity to become somebody that is a little bit of a unexpected rising star in this rotation, at least in the front court, because you have to think with all the injuries, Eli Rice has been the main wing option outside of maybe Bryce Williams during practice. So, maybe all this practice time, he can build some trust from the coaches and not necessarily start right away, but as a freshman, if he can work himself into a 15 to maybe close to 20 minutes per game role off the bench and still be putting up some very efficient scoring days, that's definitely going to be helpful for this Nebraska men's basketball team. So outside of that, Cale Jacobson played 20 minutes, 1 for 3, looked all right. I mean, he was one of the players who played a lot on the Spain trip. We heard the stories about Cale Jacobson playing the center and the point guard in the same game. We saw a little bit of what he can do. He's very built, kind of similar to Sam Hoiberg in the fact that he's not the tallest guy, he's not the longest defender, but he's very physically strong and built for his frame, so he's not going to back down from any sort of physical challenge. But I thought Cale Jacobson looked pretty solid as an option, maybe an emergency option off the bench for Nebraska. It's a guy who can shoot. He's a lefty. Not too many bad things coming from Cale Jacobson. Let's get into some of these post-game quotes, though, from the Nebraska exhibition. Coach Hoiberg talking about Keisei Tominaga's injury. He said, we'll know a lot more in the morning with Keisei. The ankle did swell up after he twisted it early in the first half. Hopefully he'll recover quickly from it. He's a very important part of what we do, especially on the offensive end, and we need to get him back healthy. So obviously the sentiment, same here. Keisei Tominaga one of the most important players, not only in Nebraska basketball, but in Nebraska athletics as a whole. If this Nebraska basketball team wants to advance and kind of take that next step as a program, I think Keisei Tominaga is going to have to be a big-time factor in that. But outside of that injury, we had a lot of injuries coming into the game, and Coach Hoiberg spoke about that. He said it gave us an opportunity to play a lot of different combinations, most of them very small. That's something we talked a little bit about on last week's show, kind of going through that thought experiment of all the different lineups for Nebraska that we could potentially see. We brought up a small ball option for Nebraska. The starting lineup was not one that I was thinking of, but that's what they went with in the starting five for the exhibition. So it was definitely interesting to see. He talked about some new lineup combinations as well. He said we were going to have that opportunity to see that smaller lineup at some point today, and we actually had that combination out there quite a bit against Utah when Josiah Alec tweaked his knee a little bit, and I liked what I saw. So that's a quote from Coach Hoiberg there about some of the newer lineup combinations, and it's interesting. It seems like while it may have at first appeared like they were just thrown together day of when Matar Diop was not available, apparently that's not the case. Apparently these guys had at least had a couple of minutes on the court in live action with each other. So it's at least good to see that that wasn't something they were forced into. It's good to see that they're starting to work some new lineups into this Nebraska rotation. And then last quote here that we'll talk about, Coach Hoiberg talked about Jamarcus Lawrence after the game. He said, I thought his pace was really good. I thought his defensive pressure in the second half, it starts with him. You always know you're going to get a good effort on the defensive end. Can't agree more. Jamarcus Lawrence looked really feisty defensively. Even when his shot wasn't falling, he was still contributing, still active on the defensive end, still pushing the break, still trying to get the offense kind of in that next gear tempo-wise, trying to make sure this offense that featured a bunch of newcomers and guys who had probably not played more than a couple of minutes on the court in live action together. I thought he did a great job of at least getting them into the sets pretty early. So we'll see if Jamarcus can pick up on the offensive end, but the defensive end, definitely something to kind of expect at this point from Jamarcus Lawrence. We'll step aside on Huskers Hoops Live, and when I come back, we'll go over the exhibition for the women's game right here on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Do you want to make a difference for kids, for people in poverty, for the environment? Join AmeriCorps and get things done right here in Nebraska. With lots of different programs to choose from, you can serve in your area of passion and develop your skills while earning money to pay for college or to repay student loans. All programs are filling AmeriCorps positions to start September 1st. Learn more and apply at serve.nebraska.gov. Sponsored by Serve Nebraska. Aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Air, fundamental to all living things, and it's all thanks to trees. Not only do trees supply oxygen, they also provide homes to wildlife, filter water, and let's not forget their natural beauty. But the trees need your help. The Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation is doing their part to revitalize forests across the country, and you can help. Donate to the Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation today by visiting www.arborday.org. Be that breath of fresh air and ensure forests live on for future generations.
I'm Steve Clements, businessman and cyclist.
I'm Jeff Blymeister, Chief Deputy Sheriff and cyclist.
Riding on roads can be dangerous when motorists are not cautious. A year ago, I was hit by a car while biking in the county.
Cyclists have a legal right to use the road, and drivers must give them at least 3 feet of space. It's the law.
Cyclists should wear helmets, be highly visible, and use lights after dark.
We can share the road safely.
Learn more at lincoln.ne.gov.
If you're experiencing anxiety, depression, grief, or are even just homesick, try talking to a friendly professional at CAPS, your university's counseling and psychological service. They offer individual and group services to any registered student at UNL. International students, that means you too. Just call your university health center on city campus anytime Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The services are easy and confidential, and the best part is the first 3 sessions are free. Go online at health.unl.edu/caps.
Back live in the studio on Huskers Hoops Live on KRNU and on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel for the first time in show history. It's pretty exciting to bring some new assets to the YouTube channel, so happy to bring you all the live show every single week here on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Go ahead and check it out. Subscribe to the channel. We'll be posting interview clips from the show on there all season long. Let's now get into the exhibition this weekend from the Huskers women's basketball team as Nebraska took down their opponent. Let's pull it up here real quick. 1 second here. 83-47 behind freshman Natalie Potts. She had 15 points in this game, ladies and gentlemen. Really impressive stuff. Dakota Wesleyan was not expected to be a huge challenge for this Nebraska team, especially considering that they were pretty much at full strength outside of obviously missing Allison Widener due to her season-ending injury, but nowhere near the same type of injury struggles that we saw with the men's team. I mean, you still had pretty much everyone in the rotation, that you would want. You look at the starting lineup: Kendall Coley, Alexis Markowski, Darian White, Jazz Shelley, and Maddie Kroll. So that was a question mark going into that game. Who is going to not only replace Allison Widener in the starting lineup, because we were expecting, well, maybe not at the beginning of the season, but definitely close to mid to late November, maybe early December, who would be kind of taking that role for a while until she got back. But maybe even more importantly, who was going to be taking over for Sam Hybe and who was taking over for Izzy Bourne. And so I'm not sure if this is what head coach Amy Williams is going to go to the rest of the season. I'm sure she'll want to work some new lineups in during this non-conference kind of tune-up game situation in the beginning of the season. But the starting five in this first exhibition featured Kendall Coley, Darian White, and Maddie Kroll, outside of two that we already knew would be in the starting lineup with Jazz Shelley and Alexis Markowski. I guess you could throw Maddie Kroll in there as well. She did start quite a few games last year. But let's start with how this lineup's going to do in the Big Ten season. I mean, there are now 4 starters from this game in the exhibition in the starting lineup that have a lot of experience now in Big Ten play. Maddie Kroll has the least experience of the starting lineup outside of, obviously, Darian White. We'll get to that in a second. But Maddie Kroll, she's got a full season. Jazz Shelley, she is entering her 3rd season with Nebraska. Alexis Markowski, same thing. Kendall Coley, I believe, same thing. So this is a very experienced starting lineup. And again, the only one who hasn't played in the Big Ten matchup yet is Darian White. But I'm not too concerned about that, folks. We'll get into her in a second. But Darian White was very, very impressive. But you look at the bench: Annika Stewart, Natalie Potts, Kendall Moriarty, Callan Hake, Logan Nisley, and Jess Petrie all saw action in this exhibition. And I thought all the freshmen looked pretty solid, but especially Natalie Potts. 7 for 12 shooting, 15 points, led the team in just under 21 minutes of play off the bench. So again, similar to Eli Rice with the men's team. If Natalie Potts can become a freshman that, again, not necessarily becomes a starter right away, but if she can become somebody that Nebraska can rely upon on the wing or kind of at that 3-4 position, look out. I mean, an offensive weapon at that size off the bench who's not afraid to shoot the ball is something that I think Nebraska would really welcome and definitely would need coming off of last season's struggles with some of the bench scoring. But, again, want to talk about her more. Most impressive player, in my opinion, though, was Darian White. She was only 5 for 8 from the field, but, folks, she had 13 points, 8 assists, and 4 steals. Very solid stat line for her in her first outing in Husker red. If Nebraska can add kind of this aggressive defense and tenacious defense that we saw in this exhibition from Darian White, alongside Jazz Shelley, who we've seen in the past be very effective defensively, getting steals, tipping passes in the passing lane, this is going to be a very interesting defensive backcourt and something that will be very helpful against a lot of these great backcourts that we see in the Big Ten. I think of Indiana with Chloe Moore-McNeil and Sarah Scalia. They caused major problems with Nebraska last season on New Year's Day on ESPN. That was a really close game, fun one to watch, but man, they really got after Nebraska. I also think of Genesis Bryant and Makaira Cook for Illinois. They are 2 very good guards for the Illini that I actually called a game between Nebraska and Illinois last year, and they were, I say they, Genesis Bryant actually got injured in that game in Lincoln, but Makaira Cook was cooking that night. She was incredible. She was one of the best scorers for them. She's got a great handle, and she's going to be a very difficult challenge for this Nebraska defense as well. And then you add a healthy Genesis Bryant who doesn't get injured during the game. She'll be around all season long. That dynamic duo is going to be tough as well. You look at Ohio State. They've got J.C. Sheldon, Ricky Harris, Taylor Theory. I called a game between the Nebraska and Ohio State teams last year as well. And J.C. Sheldon, she may even be a first-round pick in this upcoming WNBA draft. I checked Tankathon last night, and she's actually currently projected to go 9th to the Dallas Wings. She is the oldest player among the projected first round on Tankathon currently. So that with that comes a lot of experience, and we know what J.C. Sheldon can do. Obviously, no more Taylor Mikesell at Ohio State, but J.C. Sheldon is definitely a problem. And then obviously the biggest one, you cannot forget about Caitlin Clark at Iowa. I mean, she could probably lead a dynamic duo even if it was 1-on-2. I mean, a dynamic duo with Caitlin Clark is Caitlin Clark and some person off the street. I mean, she is that good. She is that electric. And Nebraska is going to need some elite defense on the perimeter from their guards, and even some of their bigs are going to need to help out up top with Caitlin Clark. But if Darian White can be tenacious and continue this effort, maybe Nebraska's got a better chance than we think in a lot of these tougher Big Ten matchups. So that's definitely something to watch moving forward. But overall, exhibition game, you can't make too many concrete decisions off an exhibition. But I thought both the men's and the women's team were looking pretty solid relative to what they were actually capable of putting out on the court. Nebraska men's struggling with the injuries. I thought they did a good job of responding to that. The women's team was at nearly full strength, and they pretty much dominated from end to end. 83-47 over Dakota Wesleyan. A couple of my friends from school were on the call for Big Ten Plus, so that was pretty cool to see them on the call there. They did a pretty good job. But now let's move on to past this exhibition, as opening night is just under a week away in college basketball. Let's get into some expectations for this women's basketball team at Nebraska. We did the men's team last week, so let's take a look at what I think we can expect from Coach Williams' squad this season. So Nebraska has 7 home games inside PBA between opening night and the beginning of the full Big Ten regular season. But in that range, Nebraska has some huge matchups at home. First up, versus Creighton, 1 p.m. on Sunday, November 19. Not too long from now, just over about 2.5, 3 weeks away from now. So Nebraska's got quite a bit of things to handle and try to kind of fix up going into that game. Remember, last year, Nebraska lost 2 straight games. I believe it was Creighton first and then Drake, or the other way around potentially. It's kind of eluding me right now, but Creighton is a team in state that Nebraska needs to handle. They're playing them at home, and it's not going to be easy, but I think this team, with the defense that they showed against Dakota Wesleyan, could put up a bit of a better fight against the Blue Jays. Next up would be at home against Florida Atlantic, FAU coming to town on November 29, near Thanksgiving. So that could be a pretty fun atmosphere inside PBA. And then Nebraska hosts Georgia Tech on December 2nd. So that's not too far off from the Florida Atlantic game. So we'll see if Nebraska can handle some non-conference D1 opponents this way. And it's going to be a challenge. I think 3 home games like that is a pretty good stretch and a pretty good kind of litmus test for how this Nebraska team can manage some of the tougher competition before obviously getting into the Iowas, the Illinois, the Marylands, the Indianas, and so on, the Ohio States in Big Ten women's basketball. Some big matchups on the road and some neutral site matchups as well. Wyoming on November 10th. You've got TCU in a neutral site game in St. Petersburg on November 25th. We talked with Drake Keeler last week, and he was talking on the show about all the improvements from last year for TCU. They went 8-23, so that's a very underwhelming record. But he told us, don't sleep on them. They made a lot of changes. I believe he said they brought in a lot of transfers, so that's definitely a game to kind of keep your eye on and make sure that Nebraska doesn't sleep on TCU and gets the job done. Nebraska plays at Michigan State on December 9. This is kind of before the Big Ten regular season fully takes over for the rest of the season, and we'll see. Hopefully, Nebraska is still at full strength at this point. In the year. They're going to be looking for revenge after a very close loss in the Big Ten tournament first round last year. And they've got 2 new starters this season that they didn't have against Michigan State in that matchup, obviously with Izzy Bourne and Sam Hybe gone. Will it be Darian White and Kendall Coley? That's what it looks like from the exhibition. We'll see once we get closer to that December 9th date if that still is the case, or if maybe somebody like Natalie Potts somehow fights and earns that starting 4 position for Nebraska. You never know. But looking at some of the Big Ten season, some of those important stretches that you want to kind of either string some wins together or just kind of examine, man, where can our major challenges in the season come from? So Nebraska's first 3 home Big Ten games after the Michigan State matchup on the road is versus Maryland on New Year's Eve, versus Indiana on January 7, and home versus Illinois on January 11. That is a tough start to the Big Ten season, in my opinion. Each of these teams gave Nebraska some very difficult challenges last year. You've got Illinois with the comeback win inside PBA. You've got Maryland, who was actually one where Nebraska took the first matchup of the year, but they went deep in the March Madness bracket. They lost to the number 1 seed South Carolina after 3 tournament wins against Holy Cross, number 25 Arizona, and number 10 Notre Dame. So Maryland is going to be tough. Indiana, they got Nebraska in a close overtime loss on New Year's Day last year, like I talked about. That was such a tough loss because the Huskers actually played pretty well in that game. and they shot well from three, but they just lost it close in overtime to a team that was on their home court. But we'll see if Nebraska can kind of flip the script and maybe take that win on their own home court in the early portion of the Big Ten regular season. So that'll be kind of where we figure out how can Nebraska get some of these new faces who are going to need to make a big impact this season. How are they going to get them going early on? But another stretch to watch, and this will kind of wrap up the segment in the Big Ten regular season. Nebraska plays Michigan on the road on February 6th, and the next game right after that is Iowa on February 11th at home inside PBA at noon Central Time. Two good programs, two programs that Nebraska has struggled with the past few years. So how will Big Red kind of pick up at least one win here, especially with it being kind of later in the year as we approach March? Is the backcourt of Darian White and Jazz Shelley still going to be stout defensively? Are some of the freshmen going to be shining, or has the Big Ten season kind of proven to be too difficult for them to be difference makers early in the season? We saw Natalie Potts look good in the exhibition, but will her and some of the other freshmen look good as we get into January, February, March? That's the question. But we'll step aside on Huskers Hoops Live. Coming back, we'll look around at some of these impressive exhibitions from some of the men's teams in college basketball this past weekend on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game? And I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else. Because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
What are you still doing with all those old t-shirts that don't even fit anymore? Why not get rid of them by donating them to Goodwill of Lincoln? Goodwill of Lincoln is a not-for-profit organization that takes nearly any household item and item of clothing. Its main mission is willing workers employed and community resources maximized. Goodwill also provides a safe environment for people with mental, physical, and emotional disabilities to be employed. So what are you still doing with those t-shirts? Your freshman 15 is less noticeable in a slightly bigger shirt anyway. Donate the small ones to Goodwill of Lincoln. To contact Goodwill of Lincoln, go to lincolngoodwill.org.
Why is it that bad days and cigarettes go together so well? But they do. And when the stress builds up, so does my craving. Even though it's been months since I quit and I'm doing fine, it still gets to me. So I reach for my running shoes and head out into the night, putting one foot in front of the other, and my cravings behind me.
Call the Nebraska Tobacco Quit Line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW, 1-800-784-8669. Paid for by Tobacco Free Nebraska, aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Dad, I'm hungry. Why don't we have anything to eat?
Those are words you never want to hear as a parent. But unfortunately, putting food on the table is a constant struggle for many low-income families here in Lincoln, and they don't have the necessary skills to get and maintain a job. They rely on volunteers at the Center for People in Need that can help them through the struggle. You can make a difference in their lives by getting involved in one of the many volunteer programs that the Center for People in Need offers. For more information, please visit centerforpeopleinneed.org.
Back live on Huskers Hoops Live, keeping it locked in Big Ten basketball. As let's take a look now at some of these exhibitions this past weekend in Big Ten men's basketball. It was very impressive with some of these games. We saw upsets. We saw some pretty back and forth matchups between some ranked teams. So let's start it off with Michigan State and Tennessee playing an exhibition, the Maui Relief charity game. Really cool cause that they were supporting. And this is an exhibition, doesn't go on the record. but the bragging rights are still going to be there as Michigan State lost to Tennessee 89-88 on Sunday. But let's go over some of these numbers from the box score. First off, very important number to look at. Folks, it was October 29. There were nearly 15,000 in attendance for this game. So at the Breslin Center in Michigan State, that was the place to be in East Lansing on Sunday. There were just so many screaming fans. It felt like March. It was an impressive game to watch. And let's break it down. Michigan State, they lost, but they deserve to be highly ranked as they are right now. Tyson Walker, 22 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists on 8 for 19 shooting, 4 for 8 from 3. He's going to be potentially all Big Ten this season. I don't know what to tell you people, but Tyson Walker, very good player. Malik Hall, still here at Michigan State. 14 points, 11 boards, 1 assist. Kind of struggled from the field, but got to the free throw line 10 times. Again, a very experienced player that Nebraska will probably struggle to handle. I mean, he's a strong man up in the front court. Somebody like Josiah Alec is probably going to have to get some minutes against Michigan State, a lot more than he usually will, just to body up against some of these bigs that Michigan State has. I look at Mady Sissoko as well. He played 19 minutes, 5 points, 4 boards. Not a super effective day from him, but the physicality and just the presence, especially defensively for Sissoko, is tough to deal with. But the man that everyone's talking about from this game on the side of Michigan State is freshman Cohen Carr. 16 minutes off the bench, 4 for 6 from the field, 9 points, 4 rebounds, and only 2 turnovers. But this man can fly. This man had dunks. He was impressive in the opening night event for Michigan State. And I would not be surprised if he can put together enough flashy plays and enough highlights where there's going to be a lot of people thinking he should be all Big Ten freshman team, no questions asked. But speaking of freshmen, Xavier Booker for Michigan State. This is a guy, I'm going to be watching Xavier Booker this season. High ceiling for Xavier Booker. Only played 8 minutes off the bench, 3 points on 1 of 2 shooting. He had a 3-pointer, 3 rebounds as well for Booker. But he has a very high ceiling. His talent level on both sides, offense and defense, can be there, but it's just still all about development. But don't be surprised if once we get into maybe January or February, or definitely by March, if someone like Xavier Booker is starting to figure it out. I think of somebody maybe kind of like Kyle Filipowski at Duke, and when he was a freshman, he took a little bit to get going, but by the end of March, he was one of their best offensive players. So don't be surprised if Xavier Booker becomes something similar to that. But then you've got some of the returners as well in A.J. Hogard and Jaden Akins in that backcourt on the wing. 14 points for Hogard, 12 points for Akins. Just, again, Nebraska's going to have to figure a way out to play defense 1 through 5. These are nearly 5 starters outside of maybe Mady Sissoko who can shoot the ball from 3. Even Malik Hall, he only shot 1. He missed it on Sunday, but we've seen him in the past. He's a lefty. He can fire from deep. So Nebraska's defense is going to need to be tough against Sparty this season. Let's look at one of the other exhibitions that we saw this weekend. This one was very surprising. Illinois playing Kansas. Kansas, folks, they're the number 1 team in the country right now in the AP poll. That's not going to change off an exhibition. But they lost. They lost to Illinois by 7, 82-75 in Champaign. How do they do it? Terrence Shannon, 8 for 13 shooting, 28 points. He is back at Illinois. A lot of people thought he should have gone to the NBA. but he still has some unfinished business with the Illini, obviously a Texas Tech transfer. But wow, Terrence Shannon, if he can play like that against the number one team in the country, look out. He might be the favorite outside of maybe Zach Edey for Big Ten Player of the Year. And if Illinois is going to have Terrence Shannon playing at that level, alongside Coleman Hawkins, who can space the floor a little bit at that forward position, they've also brought in some newcomers as well. They've got Dane Danger back. He only played 9 minutes tonight. But Illinois was able to take down the number one team. And this is a Kansas team that returns Kevin McCullough. They return KJ Adams. They return DeJuan Harris. They also add former Michigan center Hunter Dickinson, who's kind of the leader and kind of that number one option for this Kansas team this year. 9 for 20 from the field, 22 points and 9 rebounds for Hunter Dickinson in this exhibition. I don't know if Illinois beats Kansas every time they play. If they play, let's say, 10 games in a row, I think maybe Kansas takes most of those. But in this exhibition, Illinois was able to pick it up. And that's very impressive. They shot 50% from the field in the first half. That's a big reason why they were able to take this game, as Kansas were shooting even better at 53%. So if you're going to compete with the number one team, you better be efficient offensively. But you look at the difference in offensive systems and just mindsets. Kansas goes 2 for 3 from beyond the arc in the first half. Illinois goes 7 for 16. So definitely a way to build up a lead in that fashion. And Illinois, I don't know if I was expecting the Illini to be as much of a challenge this year as they look to be, but man, that exhibition's impressive. Final one to look at here, Indiana, as they played, I believe, Indianapolis. Yeah, Indianapolis. Main two players to look at here, Kel'el Ware and Mackenzie Mgbako. 14 points apiece for Kel'el Ware, who transferred from Oregon, and Mackenzie Mgbako, a freshman who was initially committed to Duke, changed his commitment. Now he's playing for the Hoosiers. 14 points and 8 rebounds for the freshman. They're going to be dynamic this year. They're going to be a challenge. Kel'el Ware is a very high-level player that going into last season was expected to be potentially as high as a lottery pick in the NBA draft. And now he's in the Big Ten. So the Huskers, again, the front court matchups this season are going to be crucial. Can they get healthy early enough to be able to play a team like Indiana with 2 potential NBA players in their front court? Can they get healthy enough to play a team like Illinois, who has a potential Big Ten Player of the Year candidate on the wing? Who's going to guard Terrence Shannon? That's the question. He pretty much went off in both games against Nebraska last year. Can they change any of that? Will Bryce Williams be able to be a good matchup at that 3-man position against Terrence Shannon? And then Michigan State, they've also got a very experienced team. How does Nebraska fit in with that, with all the new faces? So many interesting storylines to continue to examine this year for Nebraska men's basketball. But don't go anywhere here on the show, as we'll start to look at some spooky scenarios here on Halloween for Nebraska as they try to establish themselves in the Big Ten here on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
The risk of an American man developing cancer in his lifetime is a little less than 1 in 2. The risk of an American woman developing cancer in her lifetime is a little more than 1 in 3, but the death rates of cancer have been declining in men and women since the early 1990s.
I relay for the support of my sister.
I relay for the support of my grandfather.
I relay for the support of my uncle.
Keep helping those in need by participating in Relay for Life. Join us for Relay for Life at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln each year to fight back against cancer. Sign up for your community event or donate at relayforlife.org.
Getting involved on campus, meeting new friends, and networking for the future can seem scary, but Scarlet Guard makes it easy for both graduate and undergraduates. Social events help students connect with others around campus, while the professional events help students network with alumni from around the globe. Possibilities within Scarlet Guard are endless, so join today. Go to huskeralum.org/scarletguard or contact the Nebraska Alumni Association. Students today, alumni tomorrow, Huskers forever.
Thanks for calling Jake's Bouncy House. This is Jake. How can I help you?
Hi, Jake. My name's Stanley, and I was just wondering if you're hiring.
No, we're actually not. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Oh, Burt's Bees. I can't find a job anywhere.
If you're a college student in need of a job, UNL's Career Services is here to help. With jobs ranging from Bouncy House employees to internships, UNL Career Services has a fit for everyone. Visit them on the second floor of the City Union or anytime online at unl.edu/careers. The help you need to make money is at the tip of your fingers.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends that you'd a partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL Men's Rugby Team. UNL Men's Rugby Team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
Back live to wrap up week 2 of the show here on KRNU, and for the first time on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Make sure you guys are subscribing to that. We'll have the interview clips with the media members posted on there after every week this season. Now it's time on this Halloween morning to kind of look at some spooky scenarios. What can be kind of scary for the Big Ten if something comes true, if some of these what-ifs actually do happen for Nebraska basketball? We look at the men's team, some of these scenarios. What if Jamarcus Lawrence does take that next step and becomes one of the top 7 lead guards in the Big Ten? What if he's top 5? What if he's one of the best lead guards in the conference? That will have to come with his shooting ability and his ability to kind of push the pace. He did a good job of that in the exhibition against Doane. And kind of what is Nebraska's ceiling if Jamarcus Lawrence can become this type of player and kind of grow while he's on the job? It's going to be something that's difficult, I would imagine, for Jamarcus to be able to not only develop, but to be able to do it while you're playing against some of the best competition that the nation has to offer in the Big Ten. We just finished talking about these exhibitions from this past weekend. Michigan State, Indiana, Illinois. We didn't even talk about Purdue. They're ranked in the top 5 as well. They're going to be a challenge. I thought their guard, Braden Smith, who I'm not super high on, he actually played pretty well in an exhibition against Arkansas not too long ago. So if he's taking a step forward, how does that impact things? Nebraska is definitely going to need Jamarcus Lawrence to make that step and push this team to the next level. Another spooky scenario here on Halloween. What's Eli Rice's scoring acumen, and what if it's not for show? Is it legit? And if it is, what can Nebraska be if they can have a wing that can score like this consistently? He led Nebraska in scoring in Spain, led him in scoring in this weekend's exhibition. And if he's coming off the bench and routinely is one of the best rotation pieces, not only on Nebraska, but in the Big Ten. If you got a guy who's 6'7", 6'8" potentially, and he's a lefty, he can shoot it from 3, he can take you off the dribble, he can take you on a straight line drive, he can finish around the rim with some finesse. A wing like that, how does Nebraska's ceiling shift if this possibility does become, in fact, true? I think it takes a big leap. I think the ceiling raises quite a bit. I think if Eli Rice can come in as a freshman, I don't know if he'll have that same impact as Bryce McGowan's did as a freshman, just because of the fact that Bryce McGowan's was a one and done to the NBA. I don't know if Eli Rice is going to get that type of opportunity early this season. I think Coach Hoiberg is going to want to rely on a lot of these veteran front court members, but What if they're not healthy? What if they're not ready to come back to play early in the season? What if Eli Rice takes that opportunity and runs with it? What if he becomes one of Nebraska's best players? How do you sit him down in favor of other guys who maybe are still working back from some nagging injuries? It's going to be a tough decision, and we'll see if Eli Rice is ready for the moment. Final one for the men's team for the spooky scenarios on Halloween. What if CJ Wilcher returns to that 40% three-point shooter he was a couple years ago with this team? Elite three-point shooting in the starting lineup or off the bench potentially. I think that's what Nebraska is going to need to compete against these top teams in the conference. And while, he's also going to need this shooting to help Nebraska maintain some of these wins that, they're expected to get. Some of these teams they're expected to beat. You add CJ's shooting to Casey, Eli Rice, Jamarcus Lawrence, Bryce Williams, maybe even Rink Mast when he is back from his kind of bizarre scenario that broke at the end of last week heading into the weekend. I didn't really touch on that too much in the show, but if you really want to know about that, go ahead and take a look on Twitter. Really just strange occurrence for Rink Mast. But then you've also got Josiah Alec coming in off the bench, hitting corner threes, being tough defensively. I think if you add a near 40% or a 40% three-point shooter in CJ Wilcher, Nebraska could be pretty spooky this season. Obviously, Wilcher didn't reach that total in the exhibition, but that's the first game of the not even the season. That's just essentially a practice game. So we'll see if CJ can kind of turn it up once the season gets underway on Monday. Now on to the women's team. What if Darian White's defense is, in fact, for real? We've been talking about it quite a bit here on the show. How good can Nebraska be if her defense is virtually tops in the Big Ten? A lot of close games last year were because of how good the guard play is in the conference. And if Nebraska is able to put up that level of a challenge against them, could be pretty big. And if Darian White and Jazz Shelley can combine to do that this season, Nebraska is going to have a good year. What if the freshmen don't play like freshmen this year? What if we see kind of an Alexis Markowski, and even at times in her freshman year, Allison Widener was impressive? What if someone like Natalie Potts or Logan Nisley or Jess Petrie can do the same thing? It was Natalie Potts in this first exhibition. How will Logan Nisley and Jess Petrie kind of respond to her? Will they outdo her? Will they be able to show some good things? Nebraska's bench becoming really deep if they can do that against some of these other Big Ten teams who are going to rely on kind of a top 8 lineup that's going to get exhausted deep into the Big Ten season. But that's going to do it here on Huskers Hoops Live for Week 2. Keep it locked on KRNU the rest of the season. Every Tuesday morning, 8 to 9, we'll be going over all the games, including this upcoming weekend, or this upcoming Monday, where Nebraska will open the season against Lindenwood for the men's team and Northwestern State for the women's team. But we'll also have all the game broadcasts and potentially a couple of pregame shows for some of the bigger games this season, with Huskers Hoops Live hopping on and taking over pregame inside PBA. So a lot of good coverage, a lot of hopefully some good basketball is going to be played in Lincoln and outside of Lincoln. And we'll see if Nebraska is up to the challenge this year. I think it's going to be a fun season, and we are just about set to get underway in the 2023-24 season. Thanks for joining me on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. But with that being said, go Big Red.
Listening to your source for indie, alternative, and local music. 90.3